educators, have you heard about a strengths-based approach? Strengths-based approach in early childhood education is a collaborative and solution-focused way of working. It might improve your observations, the way we observe children's learning and write about it. It may improve your analysis, but also if you consistently draw on the strengths-based approach, you also will provide a better program for your children in the classroom. Tune in to watch more detailed tutorial about strengths-based and how you can apply it to writing observation. So what is strengths-based approach? So I'm using the definition and explanation of this wonderful approach based on the document that is provided for kindergarten teachers in early childhood education and care Australia in Victoria. So we have so-called transition to school resource kit that I use a lot for my observations and teach other students in my training classroom on this approach. So this approach is very, very important, and it's one of the fundamental principles of Victorian early years learning and development framework. And this resource actually complements VEYLDF a lot. So if you are not familiar with Victorian early years learning and development framework, I encourage you to do so because it has quite a lot of detailed support for your observations and can help you with writing your goals for the room, analysis of observations, and even examples of how to do it, including today's tutorial that is based on the information that is provided on Department of Education Victoria. So you will find the link to this transition to school resource under this video in the description below. But let's get started. So what is strengths-based approach? Let me just get my highlight. So strengths-based approach to early childhood education is a collaborative and solution-focused way of working. So this is also about teamwork. So it's not just about observations, so it's about all aspects of our job. It encourages educators to consistently draw on their knowledge of the child's skills, capabilities, dispositions to learning. So if you remember, there are a few dispositions of learning or to learning, such as taking an interest, curiosity, persistence, etc. One of the dispositions that I like to talk about is creativity. If you don't remember dispositions by heart, I encourage you to read the books that are unpacking learning stories. You also can have a look at the EYLF, especially outcome 4, that talks more about dispositions to learning. So when this approach, strengths-based approach, is used effectively, it supports educators to set high expectations for all children by offering rich learning opportunities to motivate and interest them and help them to see themselves as learners. So you can see that this is a really, really good way of approaching our teaching and supporting learning. If you think about few fundamental theories that are behind this approach, I can give you 4. Number 1, Jean Piaget, constructivism and cognitive theory. So cognitive development theory is a developmental theory developed by Jean Piaget. So in his theory, if you remember from some of my videos or elsewhere, Jean Piaget proposed the environment acts as facilitator of learning, and children are actively exploring and discovering their environment. So looking at children, observing them and noticing their strengths, their skills, their current capabilities, their knowledge and dispositions can help you to prepare this environment that even better supporting these children's learning. A second theory that you might consider when trying to understand strengths-based approach is Lev Vygotsky or social cultural theory. Social cultural theory is one of my favorite, and on my channel Storykate you can find lots and lots of videos with examples of this theory. I'm also planning to do a video on Piaget versus Vygotsky, so tune in to watch this one. Jean Piaget was constructivist, So as Vygotsky, he was social constructivist. So as you can see, based on this definition, children construct the meaning of the world, construct their own knowledge. So children are active participants in their learning. So that's why Vygotsky theory is also behind strengths-based approach. Another concept that Vygotsky is known for is ZPD, or zone of proximal development. So Vygotsky talked about this, what's next for the child in terms of his level of capabilities. So there are areas where a child is able to act independently. For example, they can wash their hands, but there are areas where they need a lot of support or they cannot do by themselves. For example, they cannot cook meals, so they need a grandma or someone else to cook meals for them. And there are areas where they can do some things with support from the adult. Let's say grandma can scaffold the child to make a very simple cookie dough, and they do it together, and then they bake these cookies together. So with support from more knowledgeable other, child can do something that they are not able to do by themselves. As you can see, this really supports strengths-based approach because it is solution-focused, positive, and considers current skills, capabilities, dispositions, but I also would say set high expectations for each child. So the other theory that we need to consider is Loris Malaguzzi, not so much theory but approach, Reggio Emilia. So Reggio Emilia approach is well known for stating that children are competent, confident, and involved learners. This is exact phrase from the EYLF if you recognized it. But Loris Malaguzzi also was a humanist, so he believed that children deserves the best education, so that responds to their current strengths, capacities, and their capacities are really high. So he also talked about high expectations. He said that children speak 100 languages. Doesn't mean that they speak Swahili and Japanese. It means that they use different ways to express themselves, make sense of the world, and understand the world, and also communicate with us. So really great theory behind strengths-based approach. And finally, we need to consider Howard Gardner, who I talked about as well on my channel. So I talked about multiple intelligence theories, and Howard Gardner also supports the idea of strengths-based approach because quite often children are viewed through the lens of are they ready for school? Can they write? Can they read? Can they do simple math, let's say, in prep? But Howard Gardner said that each child is born with their unique talents and unique strengths and unique intelligences. For example, someone is physically strong and agile and flexible, so they are more likely to develop their talents as gymnasts or fitness instructors rather than mathematicians. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't develop their mathematical skills or pay attention to numeracy. It just means that we need to pay attention to their strengths and capabilities whenever we observe them as well. We need to properly challenge them, and that's also a wonderful idea of Howard Gardner. So 4 theories at least that are behind strengths-based approach. Hey educator, if you are watching this and you know one more theory, post in the comments below the theory or approach that supports strengths-based approach. Now let's move on to what is strengths-based approach and unpack it a little bit more. Strengths-based approach views situations realistically and looks for opportunities to complement and support existing strengths and capabilities of each individual, in our case, a child. So this is opposed to deficit approach, which means that children are viewed through the lens of what they don't have. So we don't look at behavior as a problem or concern. We don't look at delay as a problem straight away. We consider each child's strengths and we are looking for support to identify areas that we need more focus in terms of intervention to improve each child's learning and development to help them achieve their top potential. So you also can imagine that there is another approach that resonates with strengths-based approach, and we know it as growth mindset. I'm going to make the whole video on growth mindset soon, so stay tuned. But at this moment, you can remember that new EYLF 2.0 talks a lot about growth mindset, and we need to be aware of it. So, strengths-based approach is one of the fundamental principles of the Victorian framework. So, they, as I said, value children's strengths and differences. Consider for a moment, as an educator, how do you do it in your classroom? How do you value children's strengths? Do you talk about it? Do you observe them and write about these strengths? Do you display children's pictures when they achieved something? Or do you use growth mindset feedback, constructive feedback that also encourages effort? How do you celebrate differences as well? So we need to communicate high expectations to children as part of this approach. That means that we set goals that reflect child's skills, interests, competencies, and also we want them to continue developing and achieving next. Yes, so the zone of proximal development. We always work within the zone of proximal development. Remember the concept by Vygotsky. Early childhood and school teachers understand this concept of the distance traveled. I love going to professional development sessions, and I love listening to Catherine Hayden, who always describes assessment that it should reflect this distance traveled by a child. Whether they stayed in your center for 3 months or the whole year, you need to be able to describe this distance traveled by the child. What did they know at the beginning? What do they know now? What could they do at the beginning? What can they do now? And that's why strengths-based approach is fantastic for assessment. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about applying this approach to your observations and analysis. Meanwhile, we need to unpack it a little bit more. So this means that every child will be at a different place in their learning and development as they grow and experience more of the world. And I'll give you the example. So if child just moved to Australia and they do not speak English yet, but they speak their home language a little bit, so that means that they will be at a different place in terms of their verbal interactions in English. It doesn't mean that they are not able to show and demonstrate other skills or knowledge. You just need to adjust your assessment tools and consider high expectations and strength-based to develop what's next for the child. And zone of proximal development should be very clear for you for this particular child. So it's essential to develop differentiated learning strategies. That means that these strategies will be adjusted for the child who is not yet verbal. Think about how you're going to engage someone who is. So, to summarize, strengths-based approach is about assisting us, educators and early childhood teachers, to build a picture of the child that is holistic. Also, we need to reflect in this picture what child's current learning and development abilities, skills, knowledge are, and also consider the most appropriate strategies within their zone of proximal development that will help us or other educators and more knowledgeable others, adults and their life community members, to scaffold child's learning into the future. Of course, there is a lot of research about strengths-based approach. Let me show you how to find it. So if you are looking for any evidence to support your ideas, let's say if you are studying towards a Certificate 3 diploma or bachelor or even masters of early childhood education and care, and you've heard about some interesting approach, but you don't know how valid it is or what's research available on it, yes, so you can Google Scholar it, yes, so you can use Google Scholar, and you can also type in the exact words where you are looking for articles. So in this case, I found a few. So we have strengths-based approach in early years practice and research. So we can also look at this one. So that's from 2020. That's one of the most recent. And read about the effectiveness of this approach. So I'm not going to do it now. But looking at the abstract, you can see what this paper is about. They consider implications for this approach, yes, so which is very important. So they looked at 3 case studies, and then they talk about what they demonstrated. So demonstrated that it still requires critical engagement, redefining and operationalizing. So it is a valid approach, but they talk about how it needs to be explained a little bit further. So you can also open the other article and have a look at perceptions. So how, let's say, teachers in New Zealand perceive this approach. So what do they think? And you can have a look in this article. So we can find more articles obviously here through Google Scholar, and we need to consider them as peer-reviewed articles. You also can sort by dates, but it is quite clear that it is used as a tool in early childhood service, and I think this article is pretty good for us if you want to learn more about strengths-based approach. Sometimes part of your course you will need to find references, and I encourage you to use these scientific references that are peer-reviewed. So that's from scientific articles and based on the studies. Yes. So now back to our topic. I just illustrated that there was a growing body of research that suggests that this strengths-based approach is very, very good for us as early childhood educators and teachers. It encourages educators to understand what learning is. It is dynamic, complex, and holistic process. So it's not linear. It's quite interesting. It's not passive. It's dynamic, and it's not simple. It's complex, and it's not patched in terms of domains. It is holistic. So we also understand that children demonstrate their learning in different ways. So that's those multiple intelligences, that's 1,000 languages of children, according to Malaguzzi. And also it's about different needs as well. It starts with what's present, so not what's absent. So it's not deficit-based, it is strengths-based. So we write about what works for this child now, and that's very important for your observations. So we also remember that problem is the problem, that child is not the problem. So if child is biting, this is a behavior problem. Yes, so it's not the child who is a biter. So I've heard yesterday that someone said we have a biter in our class. No, you have a child who has a biting problem or displaying biting behavior. So the strengths-based approach requires us to change the way we speak about children as well. So it's slow evolution of your own teaching practices. And I encourage you to read this document many times with a highlighter to understand and unpack it. So strengths-based approach also encourages educators to identify what works for the child and when and how it works. So those strategies can be continued. So imagine this child who bites, right? So that's a behavior. So you tried one strategy. Let's say you provided a lot of distractions through some chewy, interesting food during lunch. You also discussed how it's not okay to bite other children. So we bite food, but not children. Yes. So, and this didn't work. So we need to consider what triggers the child. So when do they bite? Yes. So we also need to think when this strategy may potentially work. How does it work? And all this requires reflective practice and collaboration. So the strengths-based approach doesn't preclude consideration of a child's challenges. So it doesn't mean that we are only saying positive things about children. I'm translating academic language into simple language for you, and I'm gonna continue doing that. So for example, by reflecting when and where and why any particular behavior occurs, educators can consider best strategies to support each child. So our child bites, sometimes we need to consider when, where, and why it happens. And of course, it all goes back to reflection, which is an important part of our role as well. So what is not strengths-based approach? So strength-based approach is not deficit-based approach, which I mentioned a few times today. So we are not looking at something wrong with the child, something doesn't work in the child is broken. We look at children as abilities and what they can do, rather than disabilities, disadvantages, delays, deficit, or what they cannot do. We actually reframe it as cannot yet do, or we don't even mention it in this way. We just talk about the goals for development. Yes, so what the child can currently achieve. Remember, it could be called zone of development, of current development, if we are using Vygotsky theory. And we are also looking at zone of proximal development. What support is required to move them to this zone of proximal development next. A lot of teachers, according to some research, misunderstood strengths-based approach and saw it as not relevant for their role, and they didn't know how to use it. So that's why we need to consider that it's a very, very holistic approach, so it's not just positive, yeah. And we need to consider that educators use the same language for both parents and for other teachers. So transition reports, if you're writing, or a summative assessment, you will use the same language that is strengths-based approach. So we are not describing child's learning in a positive light or neglecting the delays that might have or areas of concern. We identify them just as areas for further development. Yes, and we identify these areas as something that we can focus on. And we also consider the support that we are able to provide to this child and the family. Yeah. So overall, so this is really, really great approach. So let's have a look at some examples. I really like these examples because this help us educators to write better observations. So pay attention to this. If you will only read this table in this particular resource, I encourage you to do so, because you can see what deficit-based observation looks like. Rosie doesn't communicate often with peers and educators. So let's say you have nonverbal Rosie and she doesn't like to talk, or she is not able to, or she just came to Australia. Remember, I mentioned a child like that. So strengths-based language will include the intentional teaching learning strategies, but also will include current capabilities of the child and view them through the lens of high expectations. Rosie is a quiet and reserved child who responds well to encouragement to communicate with trusted people. She is beginning to initiate conversations with her peers and can be further supported to remember to include others in play and communication. It doesn't say that the child is a loner. It doesn't say that the child doesn't have friends. It focuses on what child can do, child's strengths, interests, personality, and also what's next for them, the zone of proximal development. Remember? Let's look at Robert. Robert has trouble settling in the morning, taking around 10 minutes. So if you think about it, it's not so negative, it's factual, but we also can improve this deficit-based observation to this one. Robert settles best in the morning if giving time to say goodbye to his mom, and then by taking his hand and leading him to the mat for an activity. This usually takes about 10 minutes and could be an area of continued focus. Now let's look at this third example. So third example talks about George. George speaks Greek at home, but he cannot speak English at the level expected for this stage of English learning. So as you can see, while it does mention that George speaks Greek, it's still deficit-based, not strengths-based. Now let's look at the one on the right. George's first language is Greek, and he communicates confidently in Greek with family members. Some things that have helped George's English development include using pictures and objects to show him what you are talking about, repeating simple phrases related to what he's doing, for example, washing hands, putting on your hat, partnering with him with a buddy or friend during new and whole group activities. Other children also learn some simple Greek words and greetings, colors and numbers to share in his culture and have him feel a part of the group. So as you can see, you immediately notice that this center welcomes George culture and works within his multiple intelligences, and of course culturally responsive, but strengths-based too. So next one is Phoebe. Phoebe is not confident in unfamiliar environments or with new experiences. So here we have a better version of it, so which is strengths-based. Phoebe is able to confidently explore and engage with familiar environments. She requires adult support to explore new environments. She responds well to a conversation or storybook about where or what's next, so that she's able to prepare to try something new or to experience an unfamiliar environment. So you can also see that it's not just amazing in terms of how we describe the child capabilities, but it's not also overly sweet and positive. It's just factual, and it is doing what assessment should be doing. Tells us zone of proximal development for the child, tells us zone of current development, or CD, I just made it up. No, zone of current development or actual development, as Vygotsky called it, ZAD. And it does also shows teaching strategies. So this way of writing will also help you to demonstrate that you are a true teacher and you are able to support these children. So that's the strengths-based approach for you. You can read more about underlying practices here and underlying principles. Just to reiterate, and then I'll share an example with you. All children are able, capable, confident learners. They have strengths and they have interests and they have abilities. They grow and develop from their strengths, abilities, and dispositions. When children and those around them, including educators, appreciate and understand child's unique culture, unique strengths, abilities, child is better able to learn and develop. So we also can think of another theory, and that's the last bonus theory that supports the strengths-based approach, which is by Uri Bronfenbrenner, or you might know it as the ecological model. Yeah, so the ecological model is a model that talks about child in the middle of those circles that are like Matryoshka babushka dolls, and the context where child is, or systems like microsystem, macrosystem, exosystem, and chronosystem, they all impact on child's life, but also child equally impacts the context as well. So review this theory if you want to learn more and back up strengths-based approach. Start using strengths-based approach in your philosophy as a teacher during your interviews, and of course learn how to write observations using strengths-based approach. So now we're gonna look at the example of group observation, very simple, that I've done, and I'll explain you why it is strengths-based. So this is an observation of a very simple experience that we had in one of my preschool rooms, exploring worm farming and fertilizer. Today, after reading a book about how to build a worm farm, we decided to check on the worms that live in the worm farm. We learned about the fertilizer and worm juice, which is a liquid left as part of worms' work. We went outside to check if there was some worms and if there was some worm juice at the bottom of our stackable farm from Bunnings. Logan volunteered to open it to find out. Drops of liquid were dripping down the tap when he opened it. We filled the bottle, diluted the liquid, and poured it over our plants, tomatoes. They will grow, said Logan. So while it is a group experience, you see, I only describe one child, but it's still a group observation. I unpack them often for one child, so I don't have to do it again. So we are time constricted in early childhood classrooms. So I usually have group observation and then unpack it for individual children. So analysis. Today's experience demonstrated children's active engagement and hands-on exploration of the worm farm and discovery learning about worms and sustainability. Children are curious and enthusiastic about checking the worm juice and asking open-ended questions. Logan proposed some ideas we call the hypothesis, showing the growing ability to think, grasping some scientific concepts, and environmental awareness. By using natural fertilizers like worm juice, children are learning about the interconnectedness of living things in ecosystems, which aligns with the EYLF new sustainability principle. Some questions that I ask myself at the end of experience: should we discover the life cycle of the worms? Should we continue asking questions? For example, do worms have eyes? How do they move? Do worms have feelings? Also, we can get more fertilizer, and what should we do for that? For example, set up another worm farm. Maybe we can use other ways or other types of natural fertilizers to improve our tomatoes and other plants. So if we think about this observation and analysis, it is providing us with evidence of strengths-based approach. And here is why. I focused on active engagement and exploration of children. So children actively exploring the worm farm, and also they were reading a book before. So you can see this transition between, let's say, book reading experience and hands-on experience. So I also recognize children's curiosity as a disposition and hands-on learning approach, and considered children's strengths. For example, Logan proposed some ideas, so he's obviously able to share his ideas with the group. I also recognized curiosity of children in grasping the scientific concepts, and I also used a language that is strengths-based, not deficit-based. I talked about what children are able to do, and in terms of the future goals, I talked about what they would be able to learn more about sustainability and environmental awareness. So I use the word interconnectedness. As you can imagine, this would be a difficult word, so as sustainability and environmental awareness. So I will unpack them for children a little bit more. But the thing is, we are learning about fertilizers and worms, and this is our topic. So the exploration of topics can lead to inquiry, and this also is strengths-based approach. So here we go, based on children's interests, supporting their needs, supporting their strengths and their dispositions for learning. I hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, I was talking about this strengths-based approach. I will show you the document I took it from, and I will post the link in the description below. If you like this video, click on the like button, share it with your friend, educators or colleagues. Also, leave a comment, and thanks for watching. Bye for now.